Welcome. Welcome to the Poetry Flash reading series. I'm Joyce Jenkins, editor and director of Poetry Flash, beaming to you from our office here in Berkeley, California. Today we are very pleased to present Lucille Langday and Jamal Dunkle. This reading is co-sponsored by Moe's Books in Berkeley. You can purchase the featured books online at this link that is going to go in our chat box very shortly. And this is the link, bookshop.org/lists, LISTS/poetry-flash-readings. Okay, that's our online bookshop. So you are all muted on entry. Please don't unmute yourselves so that we can hear our amazing poets. To share your thoughts during the reading, please use the chat box. This meeting and reading is being recorded. We'll reserve time at the very end after the recording is off for all of you who've joined us today to talk to the poets, say hi, ask a question, anything that you didn't put in the chat box during the reading. So I want to remind you to please visit poetryflash.org. Great things we have up there right now. We have our homage to the late poet Michael McClure, the late great poet Michael McClure, and much more, many book reviews, calendar, other things that you'd like to see. To sign up for our event list on email, go to poetryflash.org and scroll down to join our mailing list or see the link in the chat box. Here's Richard Silberg, Associate Editor of Poetry Flash, who will introduce today's poets.
Hi everybody. We got two fascinating books by two poets who have each read several times with the series, but I think never together. This is their first time together. They are Lucille Langday and Jamal Dunkel. And I'm going to call her Lucy from here on in. She's an old friend of the Flash. Lucy is a complete and prolific woman of letters. This is, I think, your 7th book of poetry. You have a memoir, an amazing memoir that was nominated for a Northern California Book Award. I'm not going to mention everything that you've done, but also 2 anthologies, one of Native American poetry from California and another Fire and Rain Echo Poetry of California, which we have done a lot of readings from. A wonderful anthology. Now, Lucy's new book is Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place. And there are a number of things I want to say about this book. First of all, the poems are very, very complete in the sense of telling a story, placing things visually, opening them up to poetic sense. And Lucy, among other things, has an education in science. So these poems really have an amazing specificity about different animals, different birds, plants, and finally, probably most important, there's a real sense of wonder here of what science and the world is as we can know it, and a beautiful sense of wonder. So let's give her a warm welcome, Lucille Langday.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Joyce, and thank you to everyone in the audience for being here. I'm going to read from my new book, Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place, that came out in November from Blue Light Press. The poems in this book were written before the pandemic. So they describe a world that once existed and that I hope will exist again soon. And by that, I mean a world where we can go out and travel and explore that world and not have to worry either about catching COVID-19 or about spreading it. So the book is divided into two sections. The first section is called Foreigner, and all of the poems in the first section take place in various countries of Latin America and Europe. And then the second section of the book is called Between the Two Shining Seas, and all of these poems take place within the US. So I'm going to start out reading some poems from the Foreigner section. And I'll start out with the title poem, Birds of San Pancho, which takes place in the state of Nayarit, Mexico. And there's a great kiskadee in this poem. And this is a great kiskadee on the cover of the book. So, Birds of San Pancho. A great kiskadee sits on the casa wall, belting its exuberant song above the dusty cobblestone street. The bird is masked like a raccoon, its breast yellow as the butterflies that flit amid hibiscus and bougainvillea. Far from the casa, where palms and Maya nut trees grow lushly, a yellow-winged cacique waits in the paperbark tree, the lemony underside of its long tail cascading like silk. It surveys the scene, ignoring the golden-cheeked woodpecker, streak-backed oriole, flycatchers, and scrub euphonia sharing the selva. Farther down the dirt road, where red ants live inside acacia thorns, a pale cow wanders alone, snubbing the fat chachalacas, singing chachalaca as I pass by. It seems the birds are out to cheer me, though I know food and mates are what they're after. A whole flock of orange-fronted parakeets feasts on berries overhead. Later at the lagoon, a great blue heron, a little blue heron, a green heron, a night heron, 2 great egrets, 8 snowy egrets, and 20 cattle egrets gather while brown pelicans dive for fish and the sun's bright disk sinks into the sea. When it disappears, the egrets rise in groups and pairs to settle in 2 coconut palms for the night. Oh, to sit up there too, safe, having eaten my fill, with folded wings, watching over creation. And now I'm going to read another poem that takes place in San Pancho, though you won't know that at the beginning because this poem is based on a dream I had in San Pancho, and it's called Hologram. In my dream, my daughter shimmered on stage as a hologram, giving a lecture on sexual dysfunction for her fellow marriage and family therapists. They nodded and laughed at all the right times. I wanted to tell them she was such a terrific speaker, so witty and animated, because she'd studied dramatic art. I knew that she knew she had cancer, but expected to live. Only I knew she was already dead. No way would I tell her and break her heart. She was still my baby who'd bounced in time to the music of the Beatles. My mischievous toddler, my girl who sang on stage at Fairyland at 5. Waking to the sea's murmur at Casa Obelisco in San Pancho, Mexico, in my room with the cool tile floor and a fan turning slowly overhead, I understood this was what had happened. Through all the long months of chemo, R-CHOP, rice, R-DHAP, GEMOX, PET scans, and radiation treatments, both of us snubbed death, the hated stranger grinning smugly, waiting so near. Even as the tissues around her lungs filled with fluid from the tumor and her breathing grew labored, I held her hand and told her over and over, hang on to hope, Leanna. You can still get better, as though my love could scratch a diamond or hold back the night. And now I'm going to move ahead to Costa Rica. And the next poem is called Birthday Gifts from the Rainforest. And it takes place in Arenal, Costa Rica. A howler monkey dining in a cecropia tree, a trogon dressed in yellow, blue, and green, his dowdier mate, the blood tree oozing red sap, a river of leafcutter ants carrying bits of leaves much bigger than their bodies to their nest, ant birds and wrens chattering and flapping, a pygmy squirrel hunched on a branch, heliconias with leaves like orange beaks, sleepy hibiscus whose pistils stick out from pink buds that never open, whiptail lizards rushing every which way across the path, rattlesnake plants shaking spiky yellow blossom stalks like beads, a baby viper curled on a leaf, monkey-tailed ferns and elephant ear plants, rufous-tailed hummingbirds savoring purple blossoms of porterweed, a palm whose above-ground roots look like huge penises, all the creatures looking down at me, twice as old as I'd like to be, but not yet done with wonder. And now we're going to head to the Galapagos. This is called What the Tortoises Know. On Genovesa, as my husband lay on the beach of Darwin Bay, a sea lion came to sniff his toes, and a red-footed booby sitting with her chick in a mangrove nearby let me get kissing close. On North Seymour, the frigate birds weren't fazed by me, and a young blue-footed booby was intrigued by my walking stick. On Espanola, the sand was so thick with iguanas, it was hard not to step on them. The guide explained that the animals here don't fear us, hawks and short-eared owls being the only predators evolution has bred them to know. They first saw humans with guns and bows just 500 years ago. But giant tortoises who live to be 150 years old have seen how we kill to make boxes and combs, so heads and legs withdraw into shells at the sound of a loud voice, and they grow still as clean-picked bones. And now we're going to head to Europe. And I'm going to read a poem called Dining Alone in Athens. This takes place at Strophe Restaurant. On a rooftop beneath the Acropolis, I have sea bass wrapped in vine leaves, served with white wine, sauce, and olives. Yes, a true feast. The Erechtheion and Parthenon rise above me, columns lit and glowing against the darkening sky. Though cracked and crumbling after 2,500 years, they're more intact than the arch of Hadrian and once towering temple of Zeus on a field below. Athena planted the first olive tree here in a contest against Poseidon, whose magic was seawater. The 12 gods of Olympus declared her the winner and gave the city her name. But now the old gods are gone, their statues in museums, their temples in ruins. Around me, parties of men in short-sleeved shirts and women in sleeveless white dresses chatter. Couples gaze at each other, speaking softly. I order baklava to share with my husband, age 76, who waits neither sick nor well, back in our hotel room. And I complain to the moon that even the gods are fleeting. But I like that story, the tree, the goddess who holds her own against the sea. And now I'll read the title poem from the first part of the book, Foreigner. This one takes place in Paris. The women here wear tight pants, stylish boots, and cute jackets. In my walking shoes, baggy khakis, and Eddie Bauer hoodie, I am an obvious foreigner, une Américaine à Paris. When I catch a man staring at me at the Champ de Mars metro station, I doubt he's admiring my beauty. More likely, he's noting that I am anxious and disoriented, a good target for a pickpocket. Perhaps he is one, like the guy who got my coin purse and keys years ago at the St. Paul station, or the one who snatched my money and makeup bag in Dublin while I studied a map. A woman's voice announces in English over the paging system, "There is a pickpocket in the station. Watch your purse and wallet." I clutch my purse more tightly, change trains at Neuilly, Port Maillot, make it back to Jean's apartment in the Marais, where I've left my passport and check register with all the passports and access to my credit card accounts online. The check register is missing. Searching my luggage again and again, I try to concentrate on Chagall's bride and groom flying over the city, the view of Notre Dame from a cloud. Myself, an invisible dot somewhere down there, needing to descend the 4 flights of tilted stairs, walk past the old well festooned with flowers, find a bistro with a little round table out front, and order duck pâté with a glass of Sancerre or a crisp Vouvray. And while we're in France, I'm going to read a poem that takes place in southern France and describes something I saw at the National Museum of Archaeology. It's called Child's Grave and Finery. A 10,000-year-old grave of a child about 3 years old, covered with ochre dust and marked with 3 stones, nestled in a rock shelter under an overhanging cliff in southern France. More than 1,500 beads carefully carved from seashells and animal teeth adorned his neck, wrists, elbows, ankles, and knees. Marks inside the beads show a needle passed through them. They were sewn onto clothes that disintegrated long ago. Scratches and nicks on the outside imply the child wore these beaded clothes while he was playing. Anthropologists say this finery must signify hereditary social status. But maybe he was an only child whose grandmother polished the beads and sewed them onto his clothes, while his father hunted and his mother gathered berries, the way a grandmother today might knit or crochet a sweater or blanket. Or maybe his parents were so broken by his death that they sewed all their own beads onto his burial clothes, so anyone finding his grave would know how much he mattered. So having lost a daughter myself, when I saw this grave, the remains of the small child at the museum, I wept. It still makes me tear up to read that poem. And the last one I'll read from Europe takes place in Italy, and it's called Climbing the Leaning Tower. Waiting in line, I'm giddy as a teenager. Decades ago, I feared to go up. Now eager as the line starts moving, I step briskly toward the tower, climb the winding tilted stairs with no railing, just cracked stone walls on either side. On the 4th floor and the 7th, I go out to check the view, then keep climbing past the 7 brass bells, all the way to the top. The final flight of stairs is narrow, has indentations in the marble from centuries of feet. High above the red tiled roofs, higher even than the domes of the baptistry and cathedral, I look at the hills on the horizon hunched under clouds. What did I fear? That I would fall? That someone would push me? That the tower would finally topple after more than 600 years? I start back down thinking of what I've missed. The lava flow on Kilauea, pink dolphins of the Amazon, ziplining in Limon, the life I could begin today. So I think I'm getting braver as I get older, and I hope that will continue. So now I'm going to move ahead to the second section of the book, which is called Between the Two Shining Seas. And the way this book is structured, I'm getting closer and closer to home. So I start off in foreign countries in the first section, and then in the second section, I start on the East Coast and I work back home to California and finally end up in my own house. So we're going to start out with an East Coast poem. It's a sonnet called On Nantucket. Near houses with gray shingles and white trim, lined up on bluffs that overlook the sea, monarchs and swallowtails dip and skim, rose hips gleaming like orange berries. The ocean, a turquoise taffeta shawl, falls on sand shoulders lit by a moon, radiant as a trillion-ton pearl on a silken scarf of pink and maroon. A fiery brooch, Aquarius glitters, while great blue whales call to their mates in a pitch that you and I can't hear. Then wind picks up and dune grass quivers as we head inside and wrens migrate to a place where sun swaddles the earth all year. And now we're going to make a stop in the Midwest. This is called Behind the Scenes at the Museum, and it takes place in St. Paul, Minnesota. A science museum, big as a factory, as much underground as above, wide white basement hallways, fabrication rooms, stored collections. A giant door leads to a gallery of room-sized vaults where temperature, humidity, and light are controlled. In one, shelves hold jars of creatures floating in fixative. Shrimp, crabs, mice, fetal mountain goats. Another has drawers of insects, a huge butterfly with blue iridescent wings, a stick bug 1 foot long from South America, a whole vault for dinosaur bones. Another where a bison skeleton has been assembled, then blessed by tribal elders. More treasures, a fossil tortoise 350,000 years old, a bald eagle, its white tail and brown wings spread in a drawer. Earrings of shiny green beetle wings and a necklace of small birds from Peru. From the plains, beaded moccasins and dresses. Samples of corn, miniature ears, red or brown, more than 150 years old, more nutritious and tasty, the curator says, than corn today. Some corn now exists only here, but the museum is planting seeds to give the corn back to the tribes who gave it to early anthropologists who couldn't give them back their land, but at least thought to save the sacred corn. And now we're approaching we're in the West now. This is called Red Rock Canyon, which is near Las Vegas. Low shrubs, creosote and black brush, grayish close to the ground as stones. Yucca with fans of spiky leaves, junipers with blue berries and brownish yellow clusters of mistletoe. Prints on a rock. 5 Paiute hands, 1,000 years old. Scorpions 5 inches long. All this in a desert 15 miles west of the Las Vegas Strip, with its replicas of the Eiffel Tower, the Rialto Bridge, and the Roman Forum, and all the bells, lights, and whistles of the casinos. But even the $40 million fountains with 1,200 jets shooting water 500 feet in the air, choreographed to music, don't excite me as much as Joshua trees, twisted and gnarled into odd shapes, and broad vistas where mountains, striped red, yellow, and tan, reach toward the sun. Getting closer to California, and we're on an airplane now, headed west toward SFO. This is called Flying West. The sunset flares rose, orange, and gold above a sea of fog streaming in from the Pacific. We pass over clouds tinged pink like cotton balls stained with nail polish. The clouds, small at first and far below us, grow larger as we descend toward SFO. In my window seat, I mention none of this to the man beside me, his head bowed. He wears dark glasses. His black jacket says, "Blind Boys of Alabama" on front and back. I've heard them on YouTube singing "People Get Ready," but I cannot hear the music I think must be playing now in his head. So much beauty unshared, so much unsaid. And now we're in California, and I'll read one more sonnet. This is called Watching the Grebes, and it takes place at Clear Lake. A taut blue sky is stretched above the lake, which glitters like a rippling field of stars in early sun. 2 western grebes take a morning swim, but they don't go far before they plunge. When they emerge, beaks filled with weeds, they stand. It's time to dance. Long necks held high, black crests and white cheeks side by side. They glide as though on skis, advance toward us. Standing on the balcony, we see the shining wake they leave behind. My love, I'd like to be as easy as the grebes, who seem content to find a dancing partner as the new day starts, a dark-winged bird that knows the steps by heart. Now we're getting closer and closer to my house. The next one takes place in Oakland. It's called Last Day of Zoo Camp, and it takes place at the Oakland Zoo. Children in blue and gold zoo camp t-shirts gather at picnic tables on a hilltop shaded by pines. They have met the boa with its reddish-brown camouflage patterns, baboons with butts calloused for comfort, fruit bats which cannot echolocate but see better than any other bat, sun bears with orange necklaces of fur, and turtles whose favorite color is red. The little train has taken the campers past wallabies, emus, and kangaroos, which cannot walk backward. They have hidden treats for chimpanzees whose DNA is 98.4% identical to their own, and watch them eat, eager as children finding candy. Now the campers sing about penguins, which can stay underwater for 20 minutes, hippos with 4-foot-tall smiles, and tigers with striped skin beneath their striped fur. Parents and grandparents look on, remarkable mammals with 26 bones in each foot, a nose that can remember 50,000 scents, a brain that's 80% water, and a charge to save this planet where they are outweighed by termites, 10-1. And I'm just going to read 2 more poems. And both of these take place in my house. And the first one is another dream, and it's a dream that I had at home in my own bedroom. And it's called Dream of the Moving Chair. The chair on the terrace where I sit is white, hard. The black sea beside me, lit by stars so near they seem like fireflies. The whole universe sings unchained melody. I join in singing at the top of my lungs. Time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much. A young woman with long legs and long hair runs by, and my chair starts to move. Following her down dark streets, I want to protect her. She runs past a knot of dangerous looking men. As though propelled by my thoughts, my chair moves faster. I'll be coming home, wait for me. The woman, swift and lean, wearing shorts, runs down a leafy street and enters a building like a hotel at the end. My chair stops at the door. I go in. My daughter Leanna looks at me with surprise. "You came back," she says. "I'm so glad." "Oh, my love, my darling, it's such a long, lonely time, these 2 years since you died. I'm glad you're pleased to see me. Your children are doing well, although they miss you. How long was it before you understood I was a child myself, just 15 when you were born? How many times did I leave you with grandparents? Did I never tell you I'd always come back?" I still find it hard to read that one. And so the last poem I'll read again. We're still in my house. It's called Toys in My House. On the stereo cabinet in the living room, a black metal steam engine my grandfather, who came to California from Paterson, New Jersey by train, played with in the 1880s, when women wore bustles and every year more and more tracks were laid. 84 glass marbles in multicolored swirling shades in a handmade beige cotton sack on which my dad neatly printed his initials, R.A.L., before the stock market crash when the Charleston was the rage. Perched on a closet shelf, the Keystone televiewer I used to see naked children in 3D outside their tree-like huts in the Belgian Congo, back when blondes were called dumb and people still did the jitterbug. The Candyland game, whose plastic gingerbread people my daughter Leanna pushed through the lollipop woods when Tricky Dick was president, and the hippies danced to the dead high on mushrooms or weed. A doll, once Swan Lake Barbie, with long blonde tresses, but who got tattoos and short spiky hair, purple, pink, and green, thanks to my daughter Tamarind, when Pac-Man was new and Michael Jackson ruled MTV. Buzz Lightyear, waiting for someone new to come along, flip his helmet and hear him say, "To infinity and beyond." Now that my grandson Brandon, almost 12, would rather play Jetpack Joyride on his iPod. The miniature horse ranch set with white, chestnut, gray, and tan steeds, whose jockeys ride them over hurdles in the hands of my granddaughters, Autumn and Sabine, who still are masters of make-believe. A plastic car that plays the Mickey Mouse Club song for Devlin, my younger grandson, who scoots around the living room, unaware that the world will change, just glad to toot the horn today. So thank you very much.
All right, Lucy. A whirlwind tour of species and places and stories. And I'm so sorry about your daughter.
Thank you.
I'm choked up. I never even knew her. Okay. Our next reader is Iris Jamal Dunkel, who is a former laureate of Sonoma County. And she's going to be reading from her fourth book of poems, West Fire Archive, which is a kind of a companion book in a way to her biography of Charmian Catridge London, who was Jack London's wife. And that's titled Charmian Catridge London, Trailblazer, Author, Adventurer. And I don't think I think you're just going to be reading from the poetry. So I'll concentrate on that. It's in 3 sections. Each section envisioned as a kind of an archival box in which we might find the discoveries of our adventures. And the first is on Charmin and Jack. There's a very instructive series of notes. It actually helps. The poems stand on their own as poems, but it actually helps to read them in conjunction with the notes, because the adventures of Jack and Charmian are amazing and are detailed in the poems. The second section, it's a very unusual poetic project of biography, autobiography, history. And the second archival box is autobiography of Iris herself. And it details the loss of her mother. It brings us back to her grandma's trip in from the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma. And you know, this whole book, I feel, is a kind of a challenge to authority, a kind of an urge for us to see beyond what we are told is the case. And that's true of the final section, which is Western history. It's true of her grandmother saying that Jack Steinbeck got the Dust Bowl wrong. So Iris is a tough adventurer herself. And here she is. Let's give her a warm flutter of jazz hands. Iris Jamal Dunkel.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Richard. I love your introductions. I always have. They make writing books worth it. And Lucy, it was so wonderful to hear you read. I love your new collection, and I feel honored to get to read with you here. And thank you, Joyce, as well, who's off screen, and to Mo's Books for hosting us, even virtually. It's my favorite bookstore. It has been since I was like 11 years old. That's where I used to like scoot into the city and buy a used poetry book. So yeah, for the last 6 years, I've been writing this book, which is the biography of Charmian Catridge London. And it's the first full-length biography on Charmian, and it corrects a lot of the facts about Jack London's life, like the fact that he had a lot of help in writing many of his books from Charmian. In fact, she wrote whole passages that were not attributed to her before now. And she was a writer in her own right. And so when I found out this mistelling of history, I actually, that's where I engaged in the project. And as a poet, in order to engage on a long prose project, I had to process it through poetry. And so the first part of the project was really me in the archives working with her artifacts and writing these poems. And so I'm going to start with the first section with the poems on Charmian. And it is situated like a archival box because I love the archives. But the first poem actually is about the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, where the World's Fair took place in 1915. And that's where the building was created. It was created for that, but it was the only building that wasn't destroyed because people fought to keep it up. But I wrote this, and it was on the buses actually for a little while last year before COVID shut down the buses in San Francisco. It's called Listening to the Caryatids on the Palace of Fine Arts. And the Caryatids are the women that are holding up the columns at the top of the building. Listening to the Caryatids on the Palace of Fine Arts. The curve of roof echoes the roll of Golden Coast hills, solidified in travertine marble. In front, the reflecting pool's eye, where the dome the city's past floats, is split by swans. Once a city built from redwood plank and gold dust, until earth shook it down to mud and ash. In 1915, 11 plaster palaces bloomed from the ruined marina. For 9 months, San Francisco grew fat again with visitors and fame. The exhibition ends, palaces raised, only this mute Roman structure remains, crowned in weeping stone maidens who whisper back to us in sea wind, bird song. So one of the acts that I did when I was writing the poems was a form of erasure of Jack London's name from the life I was telling of Charmian, to kind of give her back some of the power. This poem is about her commute. She lived in Oakland and Berkeley, and then commuted on the ferry to San Francisco, where she worked as a stenographer at one of the biggest shipping firms in San Francisco. She was quite successful, had an assistant that reported to her. And so this is about the decade. There was a decade, 1890 to 1900, that was extremely difficult to research because she had destroyed a lot of her records, because one of the reasons why her life was so was forgotten was because a biographer named Irving Stone tricked her into signing away her rights to her story and wrote a fictional biography called Sailor on Horseback. And he took her private diaries, and as a response to that, she ended up burning many of her private diaries from this decade. And so I was mourning that when I wrote this poem. Truth Walks the Plank, San Francisco, 1890 to 1900. At the edge of the packed ferry boat, water and wind rush to erase her, until out from veils of fog, land comes fast, a clock-eyed ferry terminal belted by boats. And behind it, sharpen the tiered rise of office buildings, restaurants, homes, a city blinking awake. It's a decade before the earthquake, before the fires satisfied their ravenous appetites on anything that tried to be a fact. When the boat docks, Charmian walks the shaky plank between then and now, ash for water, lost papers fluttering, hungry gulls calling. One of the things that happened while I was writing this book is that my mother got very sick with ovarian cancer and passed away. And so this poem is where Charmian lost her mother when her mother was, when she was 5 years old. And she mourned her mother her whole life. And she did that by keeping her artifacts, which is why I was able to tell her mother's story, which I'm extremely grateful for. But it's something when my mother died, I started carrying around her artifacts in my purse, just without even knowing that I was doing it. It made me realize that I was repeating kind of a pattern that Charmian had done. And so this poem came from that. Artifact. A whalebone corset, waist small enough to fit between two circled hands. On nights when stars pressed down and pinned their distance, Charmian wound those threaded bones around her own waist. Her mother's manuscripts, written in delicate ink, yellowing leaves of cottonwoods that come fall raged red from the crags of the Wasatch Mountains. The tiny oval photo, her mother posed in a bonnet, midnight curls falling over her body as if to erase it. The oval photograph hangs where no one can see it. The manuscript sealed in vaults. Only scholars wearing white cotton gloves can read them. The corset, wrapped in white tissue paper, is stored in the dark mouth of Charmian's wooden dresser. My mother has only been gone a few months, so I carry her artifacts in my purse. A foldable hoof pick, a tiny wooden horse, the gold ring I once bought her on a trip to Stockholm, replica of one recovered from the Vasa, an enormous ship found sunk completely intact. The weight of wood soaked and preserved by the clear harbor water. After years of restoration, they dredged it up, but the power and surge was gone. I'm gonna read one more Charmian poem before I move on to another section. But this poem is about the journey that Jack and Charmian took through the South Seas together. And often when you read about this journey, you don't realize that many of the things that Jack London accomplished that he did, like learning how to surf in Hawaii, she also did at the same time. And she loved being at sea and being away from the gender norms that were expected of women during this time period. For example, on a boat in the middle of the South Seas, you could wear pants and not get any weird looks. Things that we take for granted now. Can you imagine being on a boat with like multiple skirts? And so she really thrived. And not only that, but they were away from the public eye. Jack London was really such a famous author that, you know, paparazzi basically followed them around. So this poem, there's one term in it that you might need to know, and that's called blackbirding. That's the in the South Seas, the stealing of native people and enslaving them in plantations. Make them float in your mouth. Aboard the Snark, 1906 to 1907. If you want a story, look for it. Begin with the idea of 7 years. Imagine a boat. Build it from paper and ideas. Sail it into the hiss of lava as it enters the sea. When you reach your first destination, ride a 75-pound surfboard and fail all day. Watch the plantation workers cleave sweet fruit with machete again and again until the story you've told yourself begins to stutter and spit. Go to Molokai on the 4th of July and see for yourself the small girl who, missing a nose or an arm and covered with sores, wears sequined clothes and dances. You have to sail on past empty pockets and bank accounts. Watch your itinerary dissolve in the water next to the Australian yacht converted for blackbirding. See the machete lines carved in the teak door. You have to lose all of your water and then be blessed with a storm. You have to endure sores the size of baseballs that seep and cling to your calves and thighs. You have to go up river into the luscious green tangle of unknown until the flowers emerge, red, hibiscus-like, large enough to contain the whole sun-syrupy sky. You have to find that island, make it float in your mouth. So I want to read a couple poems from the middle section that's about biography. I mean, the autobiography. It's more about my time in Sonoma County in 2017 while we were going through the wildfires. I was the poet laureate at that time, which was a really strange position to be in. But we all came together as a writing community and, found that, I mean, so many people lost our houses during that time. It was such an invasive fire, and that we had events to come together and write together was really what saved us. But I want to read about a poem that's called Ground Truthing After the Great Fires. I borrowed the term ground truthing from Terry Tempest Williams. And it's the idea of looking at the land and seeing the story that it's telling and actually listening to it. And what fire paths that destroyed Santa Rosa in 2017 in the Tubbs fire had been there, and in recorded history, they had burned twice in the same path. And so there was a great fire in 1870 and then another in 1964. And so this poem is about the fact that we do not see those paths when we build new housing developments. Ground truthing after the great fires. When our bodies were still fogged with desire, we'd park in the dark on the barren gold hills and look out at the jeweled city below us. We were too young to remember the fires that swept the hillside clean of oak and scrub. Now rattlers slept under weathered rocks, and barn owls the size of toddlers sat like prophets in the remains of trees. But we couldn't see them, our cars clouded with breath. When the years drifted on and we left for college and the hillside was sold, leveled, and built up, houses rose ghost-like on the ridge. We weren't the only ones who hadn't seen the remains of the last fires. We who returned woke from our middle-aged lives to choke of smoke, skies pulsing crimson, ash like heavy rain drifting down. The moon a red eye, news looping the same story, fire that won't stop. The whole hillside where we'd once parked, pressed our bodies against each other, burned by a fire so hungry it became a wall that jumped the freeway to find more to burn. On that windy night, we were all of the same body. The city we had once looked out across was in us. forgotten the Great Fire of 1870, forgotten the Hanley Fire of 1964, soon to be forgotten, the Tubbs Fire of 2017. Even though the land tells us that all three fires devoured the same path. Now, when young red-tailed hawks scream across the air above our homes, when the barn owls roost on the eaves of trees and the crows shuffle in the oaks, we know it is warning or plea. Fire will pour its velvet tongue across your valley again and again, even if you don't remember. I sure miss reading to a room. Don't you guys miss being at poetry readings live? I was just telling Joyce that. I'm gonna read the poem that Richard mentioned about my grandmother. My next biography is actually moving from this very idea that Steinbeck didn't get it right. When I was little, I read The Grapes of Wrath, of course, in high school, and I went home and told my grandma that I read it, and I was like, "Grandma, they wrote a book about the Okies, about us. It's so cool." And she's like, "He didn't get it right," and I just thought she was grumpy, you know, because my grandmother was really grumpy. That was not true. She was absolutely right, and I wish she was alive now that I could tell her. And so, the Grapes of Wrath is set in counties where there was no drought, where there was no Dust Bowl. And so the person who wrote an incredible novel about the Dust Bowl called Whose Names Are Unknown is my next subject of biography. Her name is Sonora Babb. And if you haven't read her, I highly recommend her. But soon you will hear a lot about her from me. This is called Communion of Dust. It's how I arrived in this place. Dust, blood, thin figures, shadows stretched like bars against a farm gone fallow, gone dust, gone wind. My grandmother said Steinbeck never got it right. The place, the leaving, and how it felt to be a child in a world gone back to dust. She'd breathe the dust into me on some birthdays, or when I'd come back to visit from college, until the dust stuck to my tongue, clouded my eyes as I tried to drift farther and farther away. She whispered into my ear the songs she'd sung in the canneries, those long hours she'd worked as a child, until the land had become me, no way to escape, the need to carry it, to tell it. I'm going to read two more poems. This one is called Sinkhole. My grandmother also makes an appearance in this poem. It's actually about our driveway washing out a couple of years ago when we had heavy rains. We had a sinkhole in our driveway. We live up on a hill and there's no other way to get there. But it also has to do with our relationship with the environment. That idea, the Western idea, that androcentric idea that, you know, we can just use the land and move on and use more. That is really part of Turner's Western thesis, right? The idea that you could just come through and take what you needed and keep going. And the way disaster has come to haunt us in response to that. This is called Sinkhole. Driveway washed out. We are done drifting from place to blown place. A silver boat lies like a question on the side of the road. River keeps rising. It is our heritage to continue through dust storm, drought, fire, flood, mudslide, earthquake. The woods around our house lean in, listening for what the seasons have to offer up. When you reroute a river, restitch a seam, something breaks. My grandmother sat close as her radio spit hate. Even a small spark can ignite. When you live this close to a river, this close to the woods, this close to a fault line, better know your way out fast. How will I pack up all her hate Once saw a river stitched into the ceiling, blue and silver sequins snaking across as if change could be caught. This time we will dig out. Our mouths will be dry, stuffed with feathers. Second time the rain washed out our driveway, the red brick teeth of the road were revealed. Is this my inheritance? Owls don't come out in rain, so the sound of our sentinel is gone. Red bricks cemented together under 3 feet of river rock we've shoveled on. Once the previous inhabitants came back to sit with the stone-jawed creek. They never revealed their source or why they'd hidden statues of Greek goddesses in the walls. My grandmother could be a low morning fog that clings to the trembling redwoods, or she could be the minerals beneath soil that stubbornly hold this whole thing down. Now that the owls have gone mute, now that all we've built is washing away gravel, mud, the weight of what we've been collecting, my tongue has gone heavy. Too many stones washing down. Now that the skeleton, blood red bricks has shown its form, are underneath. The rain will keep coming, whether we live or die. We will hold our story down. And I thought I would end with another poem. Thought I'd end with a sonnet. I love how you also write form so much, Lucy. This is actually a broken sonnet. It's called Daphne's Broken Sonnet. And I just want to finish by saying thank you so much to everyone for coming and sharing this day with us, but also thank you to Poetry Flash for all that you do for poetry. And I hope you guys will have some questions for us. Daphne's Broken Sonnet. Apples are imagining themselves into hillsides. Pink petals stick out their tongues from the dark mouths of branches, and the forest canopy ripens overnight until it pulses like a green heart. Spring Frankensteins us all, softens our cyborg brains. Admit it, you were thinking about what mysteries your phone will sing out, while your body turns like a tree toward the light. Reader, some days it's just too much. Powder blue sky, light wind stirring, the leaves as if they are waving, no, beckoning me to root and join in. How could I not give in? Trying to find the song that's buried in the soil. Thank you so much.
All right. Let me express our deep thanks to these two wonderful poets, Lucille Langday, Iris Jamal Dunkel. Here comes Joyce to sign us off.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to remind you that to purchase these amazing books that we've been talking about, please go to our online bookstore. That's bookshop.org/lists, LISTS/poetry-flash-readings. And the link is also in the chat box. So thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to you wonderful poets, and thanks to Claire for tech support today.